We have some different strategies that we use throughout the year to feed our bees, and it all depends on the conditions at that time of year and what we're looking to get out of feeding. And we use the bees to let us know at times of the year whether we need to feed or not. It's a little bit different from year to year. You just kind of have to play it by ear, by your inspections and seeing how much feed is in the hives. There's three times of the year that we feed, two primary times of the year, and that'll be early spring and late fall. The third time being after we pull honey in summer through the dearth, and that's the biggest time we kind of have to play by ear. Sometimes they'll have enough feed coming in to either feed lightly or not feed at all. But the biggest times of the year we feed is early spring, and we use 3 different ratios of syrup to feed. Early spring for an early brood buildup, and to not put a lot of weight on the hive, we'll use a light syrup, and that'll be 2 parts water to 1 part sugar, and that's what we call our light syrup. That keeps from really filling up the brood nest with syrup, but it stimulates the bees to really build a big brood nest and a big population of bees. During the fall, we will feed a couple different ratios, but primarily at the end of the season, to put weight on the hive quickly, we'll feed a heavy syrup. That'll be 2 parts sugar to 1 part water. It's what we call heavy syrup. And other times of the year for nuke buildup and during the dearth, when they're running low on stores, we'll feed a 1-to-1 syrup. That don't put a lot of weight on the hive, and it does keep stimulating the bees to keep a brood nest going. And that we use 1-to-1 probably the most throughout the year, but specifically two points in the year we'll use the light syrup and the heavy syrup. And to do that, we have a few different methods that we use to feed, and I'm going to go into detail and show you these different types of feeders and different ways that we use them. All right, for the different types of feeders that we use, I'm going to be talking first about feeding a deep 10-frame deep box or 8-frame deep box. We use mostly cap and ladder feeders in these, and sometimes 1-gallon or 2-gallon buckets. Our singles, we run primarily single deep hives, and at different parts of the year we'll have a double screen board on with a second hive, completely different colony on top of that double screen board. And that doesn't allow us to put a bucket on the bottom hive, so we'll use a cap and ladder style feeder. We use a Man Lake cap and ladder feeder. We use that in the bottom and a bucket on the top hive. The buckets work a little better. We prefer the buckets, but the cap and ladder is easier, and it'll be our only option in the bottom. On the cap and ladders they offer 3 different sizes on cap and ladder feeders, and I'll show you the differences in them and why we prefer what we use. The best cap and ladder style feeder we found comes from Man Lake, and it does a really good job to prevent drowning of their bees. We use a 1.5 gallon. They make a 1 gallon, 1.5 gallon, and 2 gallon. The 1 gallon takes the place of 1 frame, and it's too tight in the hive. Don't fit very well. They don't give proper bee space on the outsides. The 3 gallon is the same way. It takes the place of 2 frames, and it jams too tight in the hive, same way as the 1 gallon does. The best fit is the 1.5 gallon. It's easy to get in and out. Takes the place of 2 frames. You'll have 8 frames and the feeder. Gives good bee space on the outside. It does work the best. We'll keep those in the bottom colonies, and sometimes just a single. They still work really well. If we're going to use a bucket, that you can gauge your feeding a little better to make your feed accomplish the purpose that you're wanting to feed. If you're wanting to pour a lot of feed in the fall, build up the weight heavy, you can put a lot of holes into the feeder plug. If you're trying to draw out the feed in the springtime to simulate a nectar flow, you'll put less holes and make the feed last longer, and give them just a little bit of a trickle flow, and that helps stimulate the hive better. So that's one positive of using buckets over the cap and ladder feeders, because you can't regulate how fast they consume that with a cap and ladder feeder. We use a 1 gallon bucket and a 2 gallon bucket, and that kind of is just determined by the population of bees. If we have a good heavy deep full of bees, we'll a lot of times use a 2 gallon bucket. If it's a light colony or a nook, a lot of times we'll use just a 1 gallon bucket. Every hole we use is going to be a 50 millimeter hole, whether it be in the lid of the hive or in the buckets. And the reason for that 50 millimeter hole, we use a plug. When the feeder's not in place, a plug fits right in that hole, seals up the hive. In the buckets, we use a tent plug. Get these from Nature's Image Farm. They fit in the 50 millimeter hole in the bucket and seal up really well. You just gauge the amount of feed consumed by the bees by drilling 1/16 of an inch holes in these feeder plugs, and the number of holes is what's going to determine the rate of that intake from the bees. When we feed our nucs, we will typically use a jar or a 1 gallon bucket. Mason jar comes with a wide mouth or a regular mouth lid, and you'll want to use a regular mouth for this size hole. We drill a 71 millimeter hole. The lid on these are 70 millimeters, so that fits really good. We keep a one piece 70 millimeter lid for a plug when jars are not in use. You can also just turn a 1 gallon bucket over on top of that. Also, if you want to pour more feed into them at any given time, especially late in the fall, 1 gallon a whole lot more than this. You can get more feed into them and get them heavy faster. But most of the times through the year, we'll use a quart jar, or if you can find them, a 5-pound honey jar. For the feed holes, you can use a 2-penny nail punch holes in the lid, or the same 1/16 of an inch drill bit. Works either way. We'll feed about 3 holes in the springtime. If we're wanting to really put on a lot of weight in the fall, we might punch 5 holes, 6 holes in it. That's how we feed our nucs. That works out really good. You don't have to have a lot of equipment, a lot of different measurements to worry about. Everything's pretty standard. 71 millimeter hole in the nucs, 50 millimeter hole in the 10 frame hives, and jars and buckets. You don't have to use 1 gallon and 2 gallon. 1 gallon buckets will get you by to keep things more standard. But that's how we do it. It's kind of the easiest way we found to do it, and works out really good for us.